Hey, so if you want an advantage at the topic of reproduction in plants, this video is for you. I'm going to give you 2 very common misconceptions about self-pollination and 3 more memory shortcuts, which will just help you a lot with memorizing and answering questions. If you don't know who I am, my name is Keefe, also known as ThatBioTutor, and I help O-level pure bio students ace the subject while making their lives a lot easier. So here are 2 extremely common misconceptions about self-pollination. First, it's not asexual reproduction. A lot of students make this mistake probably because it involves pollination within the same plant. But the fact that it has pollination means that it involves pollen grains, and the male gamete is found in the pollen grain. Later on, there will also be fertilization. So fertilization only exists in sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction never has fertilization. So self-pollination is actually a form of sexual reproduction. The second mistake is that some students think self-pollination can only occur within the same flower. But actually, the definition of self-pollination is that it's just within the same plant. So oftentimes, plants have more than one flower, right? And if pollen grains come from this flower and they get transferred to this flower on the same plant, then it's still considered self-pollination. So the self is not about within the same flower, but rather within the same plant. And speaking of self-pollination, here's a memory shortcut of the features of flowers favoring self or cross-pollination. MOP or MOP. So M stands for do the male and female parts of the flower mature at the same time. For plants that favor self-pollination, the answer for this is yes. So you will have both male and female parts on the same flower, and we call that a bisexual flower. This increases the chance that pollen grains will get transferred within the same flower. Whereas for plants that favor cross-pollination, male and female parts often mature at different timings. O stands for whether the flowers are open or not. So plants that favor self-pollination, sometimes the flowers don't even open, and this ensures that pollen doesn't get in or out of the flower. So the only way for pollination is within the same flower, and that ensures self-pollination. Whereas plants that favor cross-pollination have their flowers open. Finally, P stands for the position of the anthers relative to the stigma. So if the anthers are higher than the stigma, then this is favoring self-pollination because gravity will pull the pollen grains down and it can land easily on the stigma. Versus plants that favor cross-pollination often have the anthers lower than the stigma. This way, even if the pollen falls, it's very difficult to fall on the stigma because it's going against gravity. And next, I'm going to give you a memory shortcut for flowers that favor insect versus wind pollination. It goes like this: SOAP, G, and C. S stands for the stigma. So insect pollinated flowers, the stigma is very small, but for wind pollinated, it's large and feathery to have high surface area to volume ratio to easily catch the pollen that's in the wind. O stands for the odor of the flower. For insect pollinated flowers, it's usually sweet smelling to attract the pollinators, but for wind pollinated, there is no smell. A stands for the anthers. For insect pollinated, it's usually small. For wind pollinated, it's very large because it needs to produce a lot more pollen. P stands for protruding. So are the reproductive parts of the flower protruding out? For insect pollinated, it's no. For wind, yes, because they need to be exposed to the wind. G stands for the pollen grains. For insect pollinated, it's large, rough, and spiky to get stuck in the hairs of the pollinators. Wind pollinated pollen are small, smooth, and light, so it can be easily carried by the wind. N stands for nectar. It's present in insect pollinated flowers to attract the pollinators, and of course it's not present in wind pollinated flowers. And C stands for the color. So is it bright and colorful to attract insects, or is it dull colored like wind pollinated flowers? And lastly, here's a memory shortcut about the fertilization process in a flower, stem 2D. When a pollen grain lands on a stigma, the stigma responds by producing a sugary fluid, and that's S. So this sugary fluid will cause the pollen grain to germinate, and a pollen tube will grow out, and that's T. The tip of the pollen tube secretes enzymes to digest the path through the stigma, style, and ovary wall to get to the ovule. So E stands for enzymes. M stands for the micropyle. So when the pollen tube reaches the ovule, it enters via the micropyle. At this point, the pollen tube will absorb sap and burst, releasing 2 nuclei. Now, only one will actually fuse with the ovum to form the diploid zygote. So 2 is for the 2 male sex nuclei, and D is for diploid zygote. So there you have it, STEM 2D. Very useful for those long recall questions. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps me to know what you guys like. And if you're taking O-level bio, subscribe to the channel because it's really going to help you. If you want to join my pure bio class, the link will be in the description. In the meantime, go watch this next video here.